The moment Jasmine Crockett turned the conversation toward corporate integrity, most assumed it would be a general critique of billionaire behavior. Standard political theater. Elon Musk, as usual, sat comfortably in his seat, nodding occasionally, arms folded with a half smirk. But what came next caught even the panel off guard. Crockett, maintaining a steady voice and without theatrics, reached beneath the desk and pulled out a set of documents she had clearly prepared in advance. The host blinked, unsure whether to intervene, but said nothing. She began reading directly from what she called a settlement file, dated over a decade ago, involving Tesla Inc. and a former employee whose name she omitted out of respect. The contents were shocking, not because they involved illegal activities, but because of the implications. According to the documents, the employee had raised internal concerns in 2012 about alleged data manipulation related to Model S performance metrics. These figures were crucial. They were being circulated among investors and used in pitches to secure more capital and boost stock valuation. The whistleblower claimed that the performance of some test vehicles had been exaggerated and that internal reports had been edited to present a more favorable view. When the employee pushed back, they were reportedly sidelined and eventually dismissed. What Crockett revealed next silenced the room. The employee didn't go quietly. They had filed a wrongful termination suit, and included within the claim were emails, some directly involving Musk, where senior staff discussed how stock movement would depend on positive engineering news. While Musk never explicitly ordered anyone to falsify data, the tone of the internal communications raised serious ethical red flags. Eventually, the matter was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. As part of the agreement, the documents were sealed and the individual signed a strict non-disclosure agreement. The case vanished from public memory until now. Elon Musk remained unusually quiet as Crockett continued. She was careful, deliberate. She emphasized that she wasn't accusing him of breaking the law, but rather of violating the trust of those who believed in his mission. She pointed out that while Tesla was breaking ground with innovation, its corporate culture, under Musk's leadership, had chosen to handle internal dissent not by addressing concerns, but by eliminating the source. "You preached transparency," she said, looking directly at him, "yet when truth threatened image, it was buried." She then referenced media articles and investor reports from that same period, noting that stock prices surged following performance claims Musk made publicly. These statements, she implied, may have been built on the very data the whistleblower had challenged. Although no official investigation followed back then, Crockett asked the most piercing question of the night. How many investors, small and large, made decisions based on numbers they never realized were in dispute? The reaction on the panel was a mixture of discomfort and intrigue. The host tried to regain control of the conversation, but the atmosphere had shifted. Musk, usually sharp with comebacks, simply looked down for a moment before offering a brief, non-committal response. He said he didn't recall the details of every internal complaint from over a decade ago and maintained that Tesla had always been committed to pushing the boundaries of innovation. But the damage wasn't in the legality, it was in the perception. Musk, a man who had styled himself as an agent of progress, had just been publicly reminded of a past where progress may have come at the cost of transparency. The panel didn't need to amplify the moment. The silence from Musk, the quiet rustling of the papers Crockett laid down, and the tension in the air said enough. It wasn't an explosive confrontation. It was subtle, almost surgical, a calm dismantling of a legacy that had been built on a narrative of radical openness. And for those watching at home, especially those who had invested in Musk's vision, not just financially but philosophically, it raised unsettling questions. If the foundation of a movement was compromised, what else had gone unseen? Crockett never raised her voice, never turned the moment into spectacle. But the simple act of presenting something Musk had worked to keep, hidden, did more to shake public confidence than any dramatic scandal could. Jasmine Crockett's calm demeanor barely wavered as she moved from the Tesla revelations to another, even more unexpected segment of her live address. She paused only briefly before lifting a worn, leather-bound notebook, its pages marked with sticky notes and careful highlighting. She introduced it with a respectful tone, calling it the private journal of a man who gave everything to the pursuit of space. The man she referred to had been an early employee of SpaceX, one of Elon Musk's first hires, and, according to her, someone who had quietly documented his experience inside the rocket company's earliest days. Elon Musk sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The audience was unsure whether she was about to speak in tribute or raise questions. What followed was a blend of both, but it didn't take long for the discomfort to set in. The journal, Crockett explained, was obtained through a confidential source after the former employee's death. It was never published, never intended for the public, but it contained detailed, date-stamped entries of meetings, memos, and informal exchanges with engineers and executives during the critical early development of the Falcon 1 rocket. She didn't accuse Musk of criminal wrongdoing. That wasn't her purpose. What she did was much more impactful. She questioned the myth. According to the entries which Crockett read aloud, early SpaceX launches were plagued with known risks. Engineers had repeatedly warned about faulty components, systems that hadn't passed simulated stress testing, and what they called unresolved telemetry anomalies. These aren't uncommon in the world of rocket science, but the journal suggested that decisions were being made to proceed with launches regardless, under pressure to show progress to investors, attract new capital, and most importantly, satisfy Elon Musk's timeline. In one entry, dated just days before the second, Falcon 1 launch, the employee wrote, "Elon knows the guidance system is still unstable, but he says we go. The vibe is, we've got to show the world we're moving or we'll die before we fly." That quote hung in the air. Musk, who built his legacy around revolutionary progress and bold decisions, now found his risk-taking reframed through a sobering lens, one where ambition may have compromised prudence. Crockett then cited another part of the journal detailing how safety concerns brought up in internal briefings were downplayed. Engineers who pushed too hard were quietly transferred to less critical projects or left the company altogether. The journal described a culture where disagreeing with Musk's vision was viewed as an obstacle rather than a necessary check. "He rewards breakthroughs, not breaks," one line read. "Even if the breaks are the only thing between us and disaster." There were no lawsuits, no formal investigations, only stories buried in private pages and now read aloud to millions. Musk shifted in his seat, occasionally glancing toward the moderator, but he didn't interrupt. He had likely expected the usual political critique, regulation versus innovation, maybe a jab about unionization. He didn't expect to be confronted with the quiet voice of someone who had worked tirelessly under him, whose own doubts were laid bare in pen and ink. Crockett acknowledged the success of SpaceX. She praised the breakthrough contracts with NASA and the commercial space sector, but she posed a question that once again cut through the surface. At what human cost was this success achieved? What decisions were made in boardrooms that we'll never read about in press releases? The story she unfolded didn't accuse Musk of being a fraud or criminal. Instead, it exposed the ethical gray zones navigated by those who pushed too far, too fast. For many viewers, it was the first time they had heard any suggestion that SpaceX's early culture may have resembled something closer to startup recklessness than methodical aerospace discipline. Crockett didn't need drama to make her point. She let the words from the journal, the first-hand observations, do the work. She emphasized that progress, no matter how historic, should never come without accountability. Elon Musk finally spoke, offering a carefully measured response. He said early rocket development was always dangerous and filled with risks, and he expressed sorrow if anyone ever felt pressured or unsafe. But he didn't refute the journal's contents directly. He couldn't, because, as Crockett implied, the legacy of SpaceX had already been written in part by those who dared not speak up then, but were finally being heard now. As the revelations unfolded one by one, viewers expected Elon Musk to do what he often does when cornered: respond with sharp wit, deflect with confidence, or push back with statistics and strategy. But what happened instead was something no one predicted. He didn't leap to his defense, he didn't deny, he didn't interrupt. He just sat there, visibly still, eyes focused somewhere off camera, as Jasmine Crockett's calm voice continued delivering information that challenged the very framework of the public image he had so carefully constructed. Elon Musk is not known for silence. Over the years, he has taken on journalists, short sellers, regulators, and even his own shareholders in public spats. He tweets through controversies. He charges headfirst into criticism. So when he didn't say anything, no counterattack, no denial, the moment struck harder than any rebuttal might have. It wasn't a physical collapse, but a visible internal reckoning that played out live in front of millions. Crockett, having laid out both the Tesla and SpaceX revelations, wasn't even aggressive in tone. That's what made the moment resonate more. She wasn't looking to humiliate. She was presenting facts, sourced and footnoted, and asking the questions that many had never dared ask so directly. The absence of melodrama made the effect more jarring. Her calm became a spotlight, and Musk, normally so composed in controlling a narrative, was left with no script to fall back on. A slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his water. Subtle glance to the host as if seeking a pause. Micro-expressions that didn't register as anger or confusion, but something quieter. Musk had always projected certainty. He built companies around ideas that felt impossible until they weren't. But as Crockett unfolded example after example, a pattern emerged. Each success was shadowed by ethically murky beginnings. Each innovation, though brilliant, had a cost that was never part of the press releases or keynote speeches, and now that cost was being spoken aloud. When the conversation shifted to the psychological toll on employees, Crockett quoted former workers from both Tesla and SpaceX who described environments where failure wasn't an option, not because they wanted to win, but because challenging Elon's vision was seen as heresy. Some had left quietly, broken by burnout. Others had stayed silent out of fear. Crockett mentioned one such employee who described Musk as a genius who couldn't accept being wrong, and that phrase seemed to echo in the air longer than anything else. The audience, both in the studio and watching at home, felt it. It wasn't that Musk had been caught in a scandal. It was that his reaction, or lack thereof, revealed something deeper. He didn't collapse on camera, but something in his demeanor did. The armor cracked. The charisma that had drawn millions to his companies and ideas felt, for the first time, insufficient. He looked not like the icon on the magazine covers or the subject of fanboy documentaries, but like a man being forced to look inward while the world watched. Crockett, to her credit, did not capitalize on the silence. She paused when appropriate, allowing the weight of what had been said to settle. She didn't gloat or overstate her position. That only amplified the credibility of her claims. The conversation wasn't just about past mistakes. It was about accountability and the psychological effects of unchecked influence. Musk had created empires based on visionary thinking, but this moment was about responsibility, and for once, he wasn't leading the discussion. When he finally did speak, his voice was softer than usual. He acknowledged that leadership under extreme pressure could sometimes create unintended consequences. He didn't deny the stories, nor did he fully accept them. It was a careful tightrope walk, but it didn't land with the usual impact. What mattered more was how he looked, no longer the confident futurist, but someone grappling with a truth that had never been spoken directly to him on such a stage. It was the silence that everyone remembered. The long stretches where Musk simply sat, absorbing, processing, possibly regretting. Not the collapse of a man in the literal sense, but the quiet fall of a myth, an unmasking, not of wrongdoing alone, but of the human fragility beneath the world's most celebrated innovator. In that silence, a different kind of truth emerged. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice, didn't wave papers or lean into the theatrics so common in televised showdowns. She didn't need to. Her composure became the sharpest tool in the room. With each sentence, she built a narrative not from personal attacks or political jabs, but from records, first-hand accounts, and timelines that painted a picture more powerful than accusation alone ever could. Elon Musk, seated across from her, was accustomed to challenges, but not like this. This wasn't about ideology or partisanship. It was about accountability, and she wielded it with precision. What struck observers the most was how she guided the audience through each point like a lawyer preparing a jury, firm, factual, and unapologetically steady. Her words didn't just critique, they invited reflection. She didn't aim to destroy Musk. She aimed to expose the parts of his empire that had been conveniently left out of the headlines and press conferences. With every detail she shared, she reshaped the room's dynamic. Musk, once the magnetic center of attention in almost any room he entered, found himself slowly and quietly displaced. She brought up the idea of legacy, a word Musk himself had often used in past interviews. His legacy, she pointed out, wasn't just rocket launches or electric vehicles. It was also workplace culture, decision-making under pressure, and the people who bore the brunt of mistakes made in pursuit of greatness. Crockett reminded the audience of public statements Musk had made over the years about fail fast, fail often, and she asked plainly, but fail who exactly? And who was left to clean it up? Her tone never became accusatory, which only deepened the impact. She referenced a 2015 internal survey from Tesla, where employees anonymously described the environment as inspirational but punishing, with several noting that speaking up was a career risk. She quoted a young female engineer who once said, "At Tesla, we don't raise concerns, we absorb them until we break." That quote alone shifted the temperature in the room. Musk didn't speak up to challenge her during these moments. There was no counter-argument ready. He'd built his empire on boldness, but now boldness wasn't helping him. He was listening, absorbing, perhaps recognizing that this moment wasn't just about being questioned, but about being held to a standard he often claimed to embrace. Transparency, courage, leadership, words he had tweeted, posted, and promoted for years, now echoed back at him through someone else's lens. Crockett also addressed the idea of idolization. She didn't frame Musk as evil or corrupt, but rather as a man placed on a pedestal too early for too long. She explained how unchecked admiration can blind even the most brilliant minds to their own flaws. The public, she said, often forgets that great innovation doesn't excuse ethical shortcuts. Elon Musk isn't a villain, she said calmly, but being a visionary doesn't give you immunity from responsibility. Her most compelling moment came when she asked the audience, not Musk, a simple question. What do we sacrifice in the name of progress when no one dares to say slow down? It wasn't rhetorical. It made people think. Because Musk's rise had been so meteoric, so tied to the promise of a better future, that few had ever stopped to question what corners were cut along the way. Not out of malice, but out of momentum. And in those quiet moments where Crockett allowed her words to breathe, Elon Musk didn't interrupt. He didn't laugh nervously or downplay the issue. He sat with it. That silence became part of the narrative. It suggested that maybe he too was absorbing something unfamiliar, a loss of narrative control, a reckoning that couldn't be dismissed with innovation or vision. Crockett didn't shame him. She humanized the cost of his empire, forcing even his staunchest supporters to consider that brilliance and harm are not mutually exclusive. By the end of the segment, the power dynamic had unmistakably shifted. Not through volume or spectacle, but through the undeniable weight of facts and the quiet, unwavering confidence of someone unwilling to let the truth stay buried. Crockett's approach wasn't about political victory. It was about restoring the balance between influence and responsibility, reminding a man who had shaped the future that he was still accountable for the past. As the segment concluded, the room felt transformed. There was no applause, no dramatic exit, no triumphant overture. Just a lingering silence that carried more weight than any shouted confrontation could. Elon Musk, a figure so often wrapped in certainty, had been pulled into a space he rarely occupies, one of reflection, not control. Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to destroy him. She came to challenge the story that had been accepted for too long without scrutiny. She reminded viewers that power, even when earned through brilliance, must still be answerable to truth. Her final words echoed with calm clarity. Innovation without accountability is just unchecked ambition, An unchecked ambition has a cost. It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation to reconsider what society demands from its most influential figures. Musk, who had built rockets and redefined transportation, now faced a far more personal frontier, reckoning with the impact of choices made under his leadership. For Musk, the encounter was something deeper than embarrassment. It was a rare moment where the mythology he'd cultivated cracked open, not because someone tried to humiliate him, but because someone dared to tell a fuller version of the truth. That vulnerability, his silence, his gaze lowered, his absence of rebuttal wasn't a weakness. It was a window, perhaps even a chance. Crockett didn't claim moral superiority. She didn't place herself above him. She simply refused to let convenience or reputation override what the public deserved to know. In doing so, she shifted the narrative around Musk, not to villainize him, but to remind people that even the most visionary among us are human, flawed, and capable of misjudgment when they're surrounded by awe instead of accountability. In the aftermath, people would dissect the moment endlessly. Some would defend Musk, citing the pressure of innovation. Others would laud Crockett for her restraint and precision. But no one could deny that something important had happened, something honest, rare, and deeply necessary. A powerful man had been asked to sit with truth, not spin it, and that alone was revolutionary in its own right. In the world Musk helped shape, faster, louder, ever forward, Crockett's choice to go slow, to be quiet and deliberate, was what ultimately broke through. Not with rage, not with scandal, but with clarity. And in that clarity, a message was left for everyone watching, that greatness is not diminished by accountability. It is defined by how one responds when the spotlight turns from applause to examination.